Welcome back, everybody. My name is Mark Moyer. You're in the weekly Clubroom for our fantastic event today, and I've got two amazing people, and I'm going to give a quick little introduction first. I don't normally read the introductions out loud, but in this case here, they're so accomplished that I don't want to screw it up. So I'm going to start with Dr. Stacy Feiner, and she is a nationally recognized innovative psychologist, known for leveling up the output of athletes and the complex systems they lead. She tackles emotionally charged situations and solves them quickly. Yes, she does, with a process that brings the athlete back into alignment with their ecosystem. A welcome change from the conventional approaches that can devastate families and drain wealth. Dr. Feiner expertly uses science and experience to ensure that athletes have a lifetime of excellent performance. And I'll just add, she's freaking amazing. She's funny. She's hilarious. She knows a lot about whiskey. We'll talk about that. Just a fantastic person. I've known her for a few years. You'll love her, and she's brilliant. So can't wait to have her come in a few seconds. And then batting second, we have Coach Bob Krizancic, who's a keynote speaker, author, and a life coach who brings over 35 years experience in leading basketball programs and individuals to the highest level of success. He is known as Coach K, and he was probably the first one that was known that way. I don't know who that other guy is. He's devoted his life to the sport of basketball. He played as a youth and in high school through college at Youngstown State University. He's served as head coach of two high school boys basketball teams, Girard High School and Mentor High School, for a total of 39 years to date. He started when he was 6 years old. He's one of only 4 high school coaches in the state of Ohio to win state titles at different schools. He's received 5 Hall of Fame awards as well. He currently has, and I think it might be more than this now, who knows, but 679 career wins, which is 6th in the state history, which, if anybody knows anything about basketball, Ohio is a badass state for basketball. So that's pretty amazing. In the past 3 seasons, the Mentor High School record is 68-10. Newsflash, that's good. So I'd like to invite, by the way, gotta tell you this, he's recently received a CPC certification as a graduate of the World Coach Institute. So he's also a fantastic life coach, and he gives amazing advice. So I'm going to bring in both Stacy and Roberto. Please hold, come on in. How'd I do on that? Did I do okay, Stacy?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm here, but I don't see Robert.
He's coming.
You see me?
There he is.
Yeah, he's coming. It's
okay.
just put another quarter in the machine. He'll be fine. Turn on your camera on the bottom.
I got it.
There we go.
Wow. Holy moly. Let's wipe our brow.
I was a little concerned for a few seconds there.
Yes.
Anyways, all right. But Stacy, why don't you lead off with what your request is of our audience today?
Sure. So Bob, Coach K, and I are both coaches. We both call ourselves coaches. Coach K is traditional coach in sports and athletes and has led teams to wins. Like we think about coaches, we don't typically think about coaching in business, though in the last 20 years, coaching has become a very popular resource and service. I'm a psychologist, and I deliver psychology as my skill and my talent, my service. And what Coach K and I would really like from everybody is, presumably, assuming we provide you with some thoughtful insights, we'd really appreciate for each of the participants, each of the guests, to take stock in something that one of us or all of us, anybody has to say in today's conversation that seems insightful, something that is new and might be innovative for adding to your own skill set. So one of the things that Coach K says, how do you say it, Coach K? You say tweaking, always tweaking. Coach K always talks about tweaking your style, adding something new, and constantly innovating your style, so you're constantly growing, consistently growing. And so that would be the assignment for the duration of today, is pick something up, and then towards the end, when we kind of come to a closure, we can all share something that we learned and talk about how we might tweak our own style with the insights that we gained from today. So once a coach, always a coach, right, Kay? Right, Coach K?
Exactly.
Well, what's interesting is that um, I will be I have everybody's contact information, so I will be reaching out to everybody later and basically quizzing you on this. So please take lots of notes. Just kidding about that. But one couple things real quick. Number one, if anybody here has any questions for either Stacy or Bob, please put that in the Q&A section on the right. You'll see there it says chat participants Q&A. If you click on that Q&A section, that's the place to put it. And if you have a great question and maybe other people have not so good questions, we all have the ability to actually vote on those questions. So if you have a really good question, great, put it in there. And then other people can say, nah, that's not a good one, or that is a really good one. And I'll be asking the top few when we get to that segment. All right, so bouncing back into all kinds of things, I'm going to, Stacy, thank you for that, by the way. That was fantastic. So I'm going to shift down to Bob. So Bob, you've been coaching for, as looks like, quite a while, and you started when you were 6, as we said. But what do you think, I hope this is not the hardest question on the planet, but what would you say is the one thing that stands out the most that your young athletes tend to need help with?
I think the most important thing is believing in themselves. It's so easy to say, but, we talk about no one is going to believe in you, your teammates, your coaches, until you have that confidence and you believe in yourself. And I think in a very short amount of time, in talking to a young man or a young woman, you could get a really good feel about their confidence level. And I think that's so important, how you come across, as a young person, especially entering the business world. Your mentality is everything. Your ability, when we talk about believing in yourself, if you do, you're able to overcome adversity. Failure is not a dramatic event. You start to believe that every failure is an opportunity to get better. So again, I think we really work a lot on our players' confidence level. We do things fundamentally that are sound in every facet. When we talk about a young man coming into our program, we use the term elite, but we use the term elite in every facet: academically, athletically, ethically, morally, and that you're ready to attack the world when you leave our program.
So that's amazing. Stacy, do you want to follow up on that?
I would love to. So it's you charge everybody up, Coach. I'm all charged up.
I hope you are. Yes.
And it makes me think, when Coach K talks about confidence and believing in oneself, I think, okay, so there is the experience that the students have with the program and with the coaches in building up confidence, self-esteem, and belief in themselves. But there's also kind of the, how do when I think about what it takes to help a kid, a child, a person, a leader, develop self-esteem and confidence, one of the things is there's a difference between self-esteem and self-confidence. Self-confidence comes from typically experience. If you don't have experience, it's hard to gain confidence. So it's about learning. It's a learning curve. Learning curve helps a person gain confidence. But self-esteem comes from self-worth. And so there are so many different ways in life that our self-esteem can be challenged and sometimes weakened, and also other times bolstered. And so I would just add the one thing that helps people develop the confidence and self-esteem that they need to be resilient, to see failures as opportunities and not huge events, is validation. And I think validation is one of the most, self-validation is one of the most important aspects of being bold and confident and taking chances in the world.
I like that, but one thing I'm curious about, and I'll ask both of you about this, is that, we've all seen athletes who are lack that self-confidence, and we've seen some that seem so over the top cocky. But sometimes the cockiness is masking some other things. Do you feel, I'll start with you, Coach, are you do you encourage someone to be that cocky person that's walking around like, I got this in the bag, I'm gonna win, I'm gonna beat you, blah, blah, or do you try to tamp that down at all, or how do you feel about that?
We definitely don't like the cockiness.
Yeah.
Almost like the trash talk. I want them to be very confident, but not arrogant. And there's a fine line there.
Yeah.
When they meet an adult, immediately, shake their hands, have a conversation, look them in the eye,
Yes.
and, have some meat to the conversation. And I want that individual that is speaking to my player or my former player to know that they have the confidence versus the cockiness. I think an employer or anybody in life, a mate, would like that same thing. Somebody that they could feel the trust. Trust is huge. And again, we're throwing in different things, but character, reputation's earned. Reputation isn't given, not by a title. Character is doing the things when nobody's looking all the time. We talk about 24/7. You cannot turn who you are and be legitimate part-time. You've got to be all in 24/7. So, when you are, boy, we're just throwing crap out, but you're going to become you are going to become in life probably the 5 people that you hang with. So we say be very, very careful who you associate and who you hang with as a young person and even as an older person. That's going to, and hopefully that you rub off more on them, but your association, with a basketball program, with an athletic program, with your friends is absolutely huge. And again, you want them to be that role model versus the follower.
It's funny you mentioned that 5-person thing. I've heard that before, and in fact, it's funny. I was playing ice hockey recently, and I was in the locker room, and I was telling one of my friends there. I said to him, people say that you're the average of the 5 people that you want to elevate them, and so I told him that he's out of my 5. I said, I can't have you in here anymore. You're dragging me down. He's like, look at me, like, what? So anyways, but no, that was really a great point. Now, Stacy, when you're speaking to athletes and so forth, is there a way to get someone less cocky? Like, how do you, because I've seen some athletes that just, they're over the top, but maybe is there something you can say to them that
something I can say to them? Lots of things, right? I mean, the thing about cocky to me, so a couple of things I want to riff on from Coach, because it makes a lot of sense. So cocky, if you're following Coach's advice, then you're on 24/7. And if you're cocky, it's exhausting. I mean, cocky is exhausting. And so you can't carry cocky for 24/7. It doesn't work. And eventually, your true colors show. So I think cocky is a hard thing to carry off for a long time. And again, it's exhausting. What I think the way I might approach it is, I think cocky is evidence of a blind spot, and, a lack, again, of self-awareness, lack of self-reflection, a lack of honest self-analysis. And people are often afraid of looking at themselves. I think the magic sometimes in the work that I get to do, it's very private work. It's very personal. Sometimes it's behind, closed doors, and it's a confidential conversation. Oftentimes, though, I do include coaches, or I do include a spouse, or I do include a classmate or a teammate, or maybe not a team, but others, people who are important in the athlete's life. And, the conversation is a little bit like, what is the display trying to prove? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And I think, when you think of what the end goal is, if we can talk about what the end goal is, what are you trying to influence? Are you trying to gain reputation? Are you trying to cover something? We can have a more self-reflective conversation about what that is really about. I mean, what I really see is, I see cockiness a lot in entitlement. Like, I deserve this, and I expect this. And I think, again, I don't really like to label because I think labels are misunderstandings of what's, label is just a superficial thing that you slap on somebody because you think you understand because you think you understand the behavior, but we don't really
Right.
understand what is behind a label. And so I might say, it looks like you're coming across as cocky and it doesn't look good on you. And you're all about looking good. So maybe there's another way to get this accomplished without turning people off. So that would just be a couple ways that I would, certainly cocky is not a healthy position to be in. So
No, and you're right.
it is
It
a
is
trigger
exhausting.
or a reaction to something.
And
so
I think you're right. It is exhausting. And it's also, I think that, in my opinion, it masks other things. And, I'm assuming there's an element of, self-doubt. And so they feel like they need to overcompensate for that self-doubt and whatever it is they're working on. So, and maybe they've had to do that to be noticed at a younger age. And so but I'm always curious to hear.
But I think that's a good point. I think
Yeah.
actually that's a healthy way of looking. So I think there are extreme ways to look at cockiness, for example, that it is a disguise for something else and maybe a great degree or self-doubt or lack of self-confidence or insecurity. Yes, we could say that. But I think also I might start with a lighter explanation for it. And I might say what you just said, Mark, which is, I wonder if that worked for you before and it's just a habit now. And maybe it's just not working. So maybe we could replace it with something that works better. And I do like to start with the easier version of a presumed problem, then start with the really complicated stuff. Though I do love the complicated stuff. I only go to the complicated stuff when that's the stuff that's left over. When we've done all of the other, more
I think it's
practical
called
work.
Stacy's hammer. Is that what it's called? Anyway.
Yeah,
well,
sure. I like that. I'm an ass kicker.
Excellent.
Question, I think, was how do you bring a team back or reorient a team when they're losing or they're down on themselves? I think so I'm not on the field with athletes. The work that I do, if you think about an athlete, right, you think about them predominantly oriented towards their sport, at least when they're active in their sport and in season. And then there's all of this other noise, right? The noise of life that is happening that can be huge distractions. They can be huge confidence builders. I mean, we've seen, spouses and families on the sidelines of athletes that really encourage and lift players up. Sometimes they're playing for a parent or somebody important to them.
Right.
And other times those things are distractions. So I think what I might say, how to orient a player and the player's ecosystem back into alignment, which is kind of how you introduced me originally, Mark, is I think there are 4 ways that I might talk with an athlete about the things that are the major things that cause them to feel like they're underperforming or failing or not accomplishing their goals. One is, distractions in the mind. It's things that the self-talk or the worry or the anxiety or the sense of not living up to somebody's expectations. Something's falling apart in other parts of their lives that distract them from from performing their best on the field. The second is disconnections, emotional disconnections, being disconnected from others. And, that's probably one of the most severe reactions that people have is when they feel like they are disconnected from others. They feel alone, they're isolated, they feel loss or grief, they feel abandoned or afraid. These are all huge emotions that can, again, distract a player from performing on the field. The third is detachment from their purpose. And I would say this happens a lot with athletes when, really at any time in their career, when they are comparing themselves to others, when their rankings are, kind of falling, or they're just their purpose has been so focused on winning or the sport or performing or being the best in some way, and they feel that that's at risk. And then if that's at risk, Maybe they've been injured. What purpose do they have? So purpose can be a really slippery slope. And then I would say the fourth thing is detachment from purpose and disrupted from being present. And one of our guests is on a meditation journey. And so I would think that this falls into kind of the sense of being present in time and being oriented to the here and now. And when that gets disrupted, we can have an existential crisis. And I don't know how familiar the guests are with that kind of concept, but an existential crisis is what is my reason for being on the planet. And that's happening. Actually, that happened hugely through the pandemic, where athletes were really, really disoriented and disrupted from their purpose and their orientation to the present. So I would say when I think about bringing an athlete back into alignment, it would be focus. So moving from distraction to focus, getting deep connection, being oriented to the present and being grounded in the present, and then having a clear, fiery purpose.
It's interesting that you mentioned the challenges that we all faced during the pandemic, because we, especially athletes, they're so closely aligned with and identifying as an athlete while they're still playing. They don't necessarily identify as another fill in the blank, whatever it might be, a lawyer, doctor with another profession, another something. They're focused on being an athlete, and suddenly that's been taken away. And a lot of them really struggle with, well, what the hell do I do? What am I? What's do I have any expertise? What's going on? And that was such a big thing. We saw so many athletes that really went through a lot of trying times. I know I can talk about this for quite a while, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. How can, let's say I'm a baseball player and I've been injured, or I'm a football player, whoever it is, I've been injured, or the pandemic has canceled my season, or I'm a high school senior and, I've had my season taken away from me. What are some of the things that you'd recommend that I do to sort of keep me on a good path?
Well, if I can just, it's a hard thing to answer that all in the same way. An injured player might never be able to play again. A pandemic might keep a player out of their sport for a period of time. And a student athlete, maybe that was their last year to play. Maybe it was the most important year they played. Maybe their season was, I think it's a little, they're each different scenarios and situations. But I guess I could speak specifically, anyone, but the one that comes to mind is an athlete that was injured and taken out of their professional career permanently.
Mm-hmm.
And when I began to work with him, he was several years out and really, just not well,
Mm-hmm.
had not rebounded.
Right.
And I think that's the rebound that happens at any point in time. How do you overcome, losing your career, losing your life's dream? I think so fast forward a little bit, one of the ways that this dynamic, the rebounding or the cure or the recovery happened was when the athlete, realized that the mindset of an athlete doesn't go away. So the application of an elite mindset applies everywhere.
Okay.
Not just on the sport. So when he began to realize that it was his elite mind that could perform in any context, and in fact that it was his mindset that allowed him to perform great, not necessarily the talent in the sport. He had many talents, he just hadn't discovered them because he had been playing in this sport for 15 years, 20 years without any distraction or without any opportunity to build other aspects of himself. So that's another thing. Other aspects of an athlete's life kind of atrophied, right? There's no muscular strength in envisioning or creativity in developing other aspects of themselves. So basically what we said is, youth is not wasted on the young. Youth is, the opportunity to reinvent yourself is always available, especially when you have an elite mindset. I mean, for me, I've been the same psychologist for my whole career, but I've done it in, I think maybe maybe half a dozen different industries. And so when I work with athletes, I use a little bit of my own experience. How do you translate your ability, your excellent ability, your elite ability to problem solve, to see the world, to create discipline, to bring teams together, all of those unique skills into other environments that are hungry for that kind of leadership and discipline. I don't know if I answered the question well.
No, of course you did. Now, I guess pivoting a little bit towards mindset itself. One of the things that I still try to do as much as I can is visualization, and because I feel that sometimes that I've heard many you hear a lot of the top athletes saying that they saw themselves scoring a goal or getting a base hit, that sort of thing, and they plot that out in advance. But do you, when you're working with your clients, do you talk much about visualization, or is that not really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, again, I'm not necessarily working with the athlete in their sport, but I will tell you, I do borrow, ever since I started working with professional athletes, which is about 3 years ago, just by happenstance, an athlete, a mom's mom told one of the athletes during the beginning of the pandemic that, that he could call me, and he ended up calling me. He said, I'm in a funk, and somebody told me you could help. So, it was a little awkward at the beginning, but as the conversation progressed, I made an analogy to a slump, and I asked him to educate me, to inform, to tell me what does it mean to be in a slump, and how do you get out of a slump? And then we transitioned that to a funk, and we applied that, and it was very eye-opening, and it was a big relief to be able to make that analogy. But I would say that, hey, Bob.
He's back.
Yeah, I'll just finish this quick question. But the question again, Mark, is.
Well, I was talking about the mindset visualization.
The mindset. So one of the things in my process, when I introduce athletes to their ecosystem, right? So they oftentimes have a huge blind spot to all of the relationships in their ecosystem that they can identify and then facilitate as resources, that they're leaders of this ecosystem. All of these people in these groups are dependent on the performance and the attention of the athlete. And so what we do is we visualize the ecosystem, and we visualize a process from beginning to end. What will this look like when this athlete becomes the owner, right? Becomes the leader of their whole ecosystem, not just their sport, not just their particular profession, but all the relationships that are inside their ecosystem that they are leaders of. And then we visualize that from beginning to end before we make any decisions. So before we actually perform before we execute the process, we visualize it from beginning to end. And that allows us to correct potential problems along the way, and solidify and fortify the focus and the activities and the approach that we want to take. So
nice.
That's how I would do it. Excellent.
No, so Bob, I don't know if you did hear that question or not, but just regarding, I like to talk about visualization, and do you encourage that for your players to visualize, for example, making those free throws or making the 3-point shot, or is it do you talk at all about that, or not necessarily?
There's some coaches that use imagery, visualization, and I could tell you that we bring it up, but it's not one of our main points. We give our players a lot of freedom, and our practices become so much more important and a learning point than the games. And we talked about trust factor. And I remember alluding to one of your questions, how do we overcome failure or loss? In practices, we, as soon as they miss 2 to 3 shots, we'll stop and say, if you quit shooting or then would you rather sit on a bench or be on the floor? Overcoming adversity is huge, especially in a game, because it's going to happen numerous times and you want it to happen less than the other team. If we have a loss, we meet with our assistant coaches right away. Then I'll meet with our captain. Then we'll meet with the team. And our famous, a loss is only good if we're better the next game. And that's what we tell them if in the locker room within minutes. If we've lost a game, we're going to say within the next day, 2 or 3, when our next game, we're going to get better.
How important is it that athletes develop and explore other hobbies outside of their sport? Have you noticed any difference between athletes that only focus on their sport versus those with hobbies?
I'll take that one. That'll be mine. I'll field that question. And who asked the question?
Lauren King.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah,
Nice to have the question. I appreciate it. Well, so I think hobbies are great. I don't know if I always use the term hobbies. I think back in the day, hobbies was kind of maybe a well-rounded term, but I'm not sure that it's so much that anymore. I think, when I think about the executives and the leaders who I work with, not a lot of us who are really committed to the sport do anything outside, outside our work. We're working 24/7. We're called on all the time. I mean, it's such a complex world that we're responsible for. There isn't a lot of time and there isn't a lot of interest when you're busy in your, when you're busy in your sport and you're doing it. And then in the off season, I think it can be really quiet, right? And I think a lot of times there's an expectation that life is always exciting. I mean, even at my house, sometimes it's like when we have nothing to do, we worry that we're supposed to be doing something. So I think everybody probably needs to learn more, to be more well-rounded. Hobbies, maybe. I think I think what we need more music in our life. We need more nature in our life. We need more quiet in our life. We more dance or laughter or downtime. So I think it's of critical importance that athletes explore other interests. I think that what I have found is the reason why the work is so exciting when I'm coaching an athlete and their ecosystem is what they love. I think what they probably love most about the time with me is all of their ideas are worthy of time, so they can we think a lot together. I have one particular client who he'll make a really provocative point and then argue that point with lots of other individual ideas as though that's going to prove the point. And I'm like, well, all of those other individual ideas are just, they're very superficial. If you were to take one and dive deep, we could explain this with this concept going really deep. So anyway, I think it's fun to think deeply about their perspective, their ideas, their ideals, and from that point they become more self-aware, more well-rounded, and then they can feel more directed towards pursuing other interests and other fields. I have one client who just loves to study about the Greek gods. He didn't know anything about them, and now he knows about them, and it's in the stars and in the books, and it's, so we are studying Greek mythology together.
Wow.
Figure.
Well, one of the things that I write about in my book is the concept that when a player is playing, they don't want to ever think about plan B, because plan A is the only plan. They're focusing on their sport. And so when other people give them advice, say, oh, you got to be ready for your plan B when you retire, they don't want to hear it. I'm not listening to you. Plan A is it. So what I talk about is you don't plan for your plan B once you retire. you develop secondary interests over the course of time, especially as you start getting a little bit later on in your career. And when I reference secondary interests, I'm talking about if you're interested in enjoy photography or music or real estate or anything like that. And so to me, an athlete can dedicate 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. If they're watching something on Netflix, maybe they start watching something surrounding real estate or surrounding photography, and not just just sort of vegging out the whole time. And studies have shown that when an athlete is, as you said, more well-rounded, they're developing secondary interests, they're actually going to perform better on the field, on the rink, on the whatever it is. And that also in turn can prepare them for what they start consider doing when they leave their sport. So to me, the idea of a secondary interest is so important to instill. And right now I think that I'm seeing much more of that happening with current athletes, where they are sort of whether it's getting involved with NFTs or other stuff. I mean, they're starting to open their eyes to other things and art and whatnot that they didn't used to, even just going back 10, 15, 20 years.
I really think it starts with an interest in themselves before they can find an interest outside in the world. I mean, I think most of us, but particularly athletes, they are not self. They don't have a good sense of their own interests. I mean, and they haven't had a lot of time to talk about themselves, their ideas, their perspectives, their beliefs, their ideas, their values. I think coming alive is about exploring those things first. And maybe if they're resistant at different times, Mark, about a plan B, it's because maybe what they really need to spend more time on is just thinking about who they are in the world, and the relationships that they want to build, and the person that they want to be, and the legacy that they want to leave. Maybe it's a little bit more emotional, maybe it's a little bit more spiritual, maybe it's a little bit more humanitarian. They certainly have a huge platform to have ideas, and if they don't have their ideas and their ideals well thought out, it's very hard to use the platform, and it's maybe too tactical to go into what other job you could do. I think spending time on really becoming interested in oneself is really important.
Well, I think that's part of it, though. So you know, it's so critical to sort of see yourself as more than just an athlete, right? It's all about, what is your identity outside of your sport? And I think that, what I'm referencing as a secondary interest is something that's literally an interest. It's it might be a hobby. It might be an interest in, finance. It might be an interest in something else, but just something that's interesting to the athlete versus planning for, gee, I need to start studying this because I'm going to do this no, it's going to be, gee, I saw my friend Bob is a blank, or Sue Ann, she likes to fly airplanes. That could be really neat someday, or something like that. But I think that, once I mean, and this with your work
Well,
with athletes, it's like, once you give them the sense that they are more than just an athlete, they bring so much to the table across the board. And you're right, but they need to discover that themselves, or with our help, of course, but they need to really, as you said, look inward and see that before they look outward too much, I think.
And one of the things about the relationship that I have discovered, at least with me, is, I mean, I really like when I can provoke in a conversation with a client, an athlete, an executive, a business owner, an investor, a board member, a team, a group of people. Maybe we'll get, to open up the conversation to everybody, and I can be provocative. I mean, a lot of times athletes will agree with me too soon. They are, and again, I'm putting words in quotes. This is not judgment. It's just an experience that I have, where they are very compliant, right? They've been required to comply with their coaches, with their teams. Sometimes they're talented, but also they're good soldiers. And I in the work that I do, you can't be a good soldier. You got to be thoughtful. I mean, you got to be a good player. You got to play the game with me. We got to do the work. But if you say yes too soon, I'm gonna challenge you. What are you saying yes to? Why are you saying yes to me so soon? Don't agree with me. It's my idea, right? Just and I've got a couple years on most of my clients, so I can rattle their cages a little bit and get away with it. They're also, anyway. So I would say that their compliance, they're not used to thinking for themselves. So it's, the world outside of sport is not just about hobbies. It really, really does challenge the way they have lived in their sport for so long. And it's it's always a pleasure when they wrestle it out with me. It's like mud wrestling. We get into it, and their anxiety and their worries come out, and the things about themselves that they don't like or they're embarrassed about, or it's never crushing, right? I hear a lot of stuff, and if it doesn't crush me, it shouldn't crush you. And so we work them into a place where they can really be self-accepting. And then once you're self-aware, you're unstoppable, right? Because you don't show up naked. Nobody's going to know anything about my client that they don't know about themselves first.
Yes. Wait, did I agree to you? Did I agree too quickly?
No, I love when you agree with me.
No, that was fantastic. And so, it's interesting. I think that, it's interesting because I see the same with military. I mean, you said earlier, good soldier, but it's true that sometimes the military is trained to, especially for those who are, whether it's in higher positions or more senior and so forth, they do say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, whatever, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge, especially that as I work with some veterans, that they need to learn how to be independent thinkers more. And I think the same can be with athletes too. Tell me a little bit about how can you encourage some of that independent thought?
Well, give them, the same way, giving people the space to have their ideas, and to, a lot of times, players will come and they'll have an idea. I haven't told anybody this, or it's kind of stupid, or, I'm not sure how I would do it. And one athlete had an invention. So I just called on one of my mechanical engineers who runs a product engineering company, and we spent half an hour on the phone. Then I brought an IP attorney. What's an IP attorney? Is intellectual property attorney.
Yeah.
And these were just conversations. I think what I like to do is just introduce my clients to the people in my lives, to the professionals in my lives before they even need them, and just start having conversations with an IP attorney, with a mechanical engineer, with just an economist, a weatherman, people in my circle that can give some exposure to the athletes, and not in a position where they have to know something or have all the questions or be dressed for the interview. It's informal conversations, and I get something out of it and they get something out of it. So I think that's part of it. The other thing I find is, what I find particularly unique and special about athletes that I have been training my business owners to do differently, and I do not accept anything less. I think I've turned clients away because they don't do what these athletes have taught me I can expect. And I've learned a lot. So first, what I love about coaching athletes is, first of all, they like the advice. They like insights. And when I serve an insight, certainly it's an insight that we've come up with together, but I've crystallized it. Maybe they haven't seen it yet. And then I serve it and I say, look at this, look what we found. And they take it and they use it. And then they use it and they thank me for it. And this concept of thanking me for it, it's not because they're giving me credit, it's because they appreciate me. And athletes appreciate, I've learned that it's so important to be appreciated, because the more I'm appreciated in the work, the harder I work for them. And I realized with my business owners, I said, if you're not appreciating me, I'm just not interested, So there's this relationship of appreciation. And then what I also like about my athletes is that they reference the advice, the particular insight again and again and again. Remember you said this, remember we said this, remember how we found this, which means that they gain 10 yards and they never lose it because they hold tight with that particular insight. And then another insight, and they learn that one, or they remember that one and they use it, they apply it, they remember it, they reference it, and then there's the next one. And so that's really how people mature emotionally. It's emotional awareness, it's emotional maturity, and then it's emotional confidence. And this is the process that that my clients who are professional athletes,
Right.
They're not mine.
Oh, you can have them. It's okay.
I love them. But anyway, but that's how emotional maturity happens. And as that happens, they can bring it back to all aspects of their lives. The other insight I'll just share really quickly is, this analogy of, and I think Lauren mentioned this about hobbies and such. In the sport, athletes practice discipline and routine, and that discipline and routine is, it becomes just habit, right? It's not always something that, and there's a great deal of relief in just following the habit. But when they're in their other lives outside of their sport, there isn't as much discipline, or there isn't required discipline. And so what happens is sometimes they kind of fall off the rails, or they get messy, or they get sloppy, or they get unreliable. And in this space, it's like it's not so much discipline they need as much as it is they need to learn limits or limit setting for themselves. So where discipline is important in the sport, limitations and limit setting is important in life. And those are other ways that, I've made sense. The process has made sense to athletes when these analogies or distinctions can be not easy to understand, but are welcomed. They're welcomed insights, and then they can be applied and used. And so I would say that growth happens, maturity happens really quickly, and that readies them for other interests. In fact, I think they should be engaging in some of those those dynamics, or those relationships, or interviews, or meetings while they're in their sport, because when they are after their sport, you kind of lose your platform. So you want to use as much of the time in your sport to gain that, because there's cachet there, and people don't say no to you in that space.
Right. Well, you know what? Jim has a question that he's put in the Q&A section. He wants to know if you're concerned at all about the latest proposal to pay high school athletes NIL money.
Well, in general, this is not a political answer. It's just a general answer. I think adults have been so irresponsible. People in power, people in positions of power have been so unreasonable and unjust or unjust for so long that there's just such a strong reaction. I just think I think it's unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate to be that children and college students are so preoccupied with capturing opportunity associated with their sport that they miss out on just other parts of their lives, and it's just a distraction. And so, I mean, if it makes it more fair, if it takes money out of the hands of the too wealthy and it puts it into the hands of the people who are performing the sport, I think that seems to be fair. But I just think it's a reaction to adults being completely irresponsible.
It seems like this is such a 60-40 answer. Not yours, I'm saying in general, because I think that we can all see both sides of the coin. I think that, as you just said, for many and forever, the wealthy and the donors and the schools have reaped, and the NCAA has reaped billions of dollars off of the efforts of these student athletes, right? The student athlete busts their tail, they're trying so hard, and it makes the school a ton of money. On the flip side, I'm concerned about predators that, I mean, I'll call them financial predators that are out there to take advantage of these kids now that are excited about the idea that they can make a fair amount of money. And it's not just the top, the quarterback or the basketball player. It's also, the tennis player or the swimmer or something that maybe gets, $20 to go down to, Jim's Pizza to talk about how good the pizza is, whatever it might be. And it's become I think it's become a little bit of a distraction. And now that they have these entities, these the collectives, they call it, but the a group of boosters and so forth that are pooling their resources to pay every member of a team $5,000 to huck whatever they're hucking, that sort of thing. I think it's going to be a problem for a while until there are ways to regulate it. But that's how we got in this mess in the first place, was a lot of regulation, right? So, I think it's a struggle between the concept of capitalism and, taking advantage of, your marketability at a young age. But my personal thing is that I could safely say that someone in high school, I think, is a little bit early to be paying them for their athletic superiority, whatever it might be. And because I don't know. Stacy, do me a favor. Tell me a little bit about your book, because I know you're an author. And what we've done is, on the right side, when we go back to the floor, you'll see on the right side there's Bob's book and Stacy's book on the right side. You'll see the book covers, and you can actually go directly to Amazon and buy your copy directly there if you'd like. But tell me a little bit about your book, and tell me about the best way that people can reach out and connect with you and that sort of thing.
We're wrapping up, everybody.
Well,
I hope I gave my best gems. I hope it was
obviously.
Well, the first book that I wrote is called Talent Mindset: The Business Owner's Guide to Building Bench Strength. And essentially, I am a psychologist, and I studied systems, family systems predominantly. And then I take my systems approach and my training on how to help individuals and families and systems develop healthy relationships, which is complex because we all have this dilemma of needing a sense of belonging and also needing a sense of self-expression. And if you go too far to the need for belonging, you might compromise your voice. You might be overly, trying to fit in and to be compliant with the group. And on the other hand, if you have too much self-expression, your voice might be so different from your clan and your group and your kin that you become ostracized or too separate. And so there's this constant tension between belonging and self-expression. And we all live with that tension. That's basically what we're all struggling with all the time, is fitting in or belonging and self-expressing. So this book, it's about maybe 4 or 5 years old now, is about how to look at bench strength from a systems perspective, how you bring people into the system, how you welcome them in the system, into the business, into the company, how you develop them, how you support, grow, and promote them, how you deploy them, and how you move them out and backfill. So it's basically making sure that leaders of companies keep pace with the growth of the business. So as the business grows, the leader has to grow, has to keep pace with that. So that was that book. The second book I'm writing, and I won't take that much time with this, is a anthology, and it will be basically asserting a new leadership, a new model of leadership for the new future that we're living in. And it will be more humanitarian. It will draw on psychology. And the anthology part is we'll have about 20 business leaders, authors, and athletes who will be writing their journey of leadership as it supports the psychology, the theory of psychology. So it'll be one of the first books that writes about leadership with the theory of psychology behind it. And then what
Gotcha.
was the other question? How to find me?
Yeah, how to find you? Where do
Here I am.
just
Yeah.
a thumbtack on a map.
Yep, you have my name, Dr. Stacy Feiner. So my website is Stacy Feiner, is Stacy at stacyfeiner.com. Oh, I'm sorry. That's my email, Stacy at stacyfeiner.com. But my website is stacyfeiner.com. Pretty easy. And then you can find me on LinkedIn.
Stacy Feiner.
I'm just reading now.
I know
I'm
you
so
are.
curious about what everybody's saying.
Well, you'll be able to see it back at the thing.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much for your
Sure.
wisdom and your energy and your enthusiasm. And I also love to thank Bob for joining us as well. And he'll be able to loop back around with us in a few minutes. But thanks to both of you for being
Yeah.
fantastic guests here in the club room. And we're going to jump back to the table. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark.
You bet.